Hello and welcome to week 8 of this course. First, just want to tell everybody that you've done a great job. We're officially made it past the halfway point in this course, and I know that summer courses are a little more challenging. There's a lot more going on during the summer. Definitely other things you'd rather be doing with than schoolwork. But so I just want to commend everyone on sticking in there and consistently completing their assignments. So great job. You should feel very proud of yourself, and just keep on pushing. Before you know it, we'll be finishing this up. Okay. And now we're going to go ahead and kind of shift gears. The first half we worked in the HTML, CSS book, learned all those different technologies and how to put that together, plus Bootstrap. Also, we will do a little bit. I didn't really add it to this, but we're going to do a little bit on Tailwinds as well. Just I'll do a quick introduction, not here on this one, but previous. I have a video for you on just kind of an introduction to Tailwinds, which is another CSS framework, and we'll have a kind of a simple assignment on that. So I just kind of wanted to introduce you to that a little bit. But after that, we're going to be wrapping up our portfolio this week, our personal portfolio, and really jumping into the second half, which is the JavaScript. Okay, so it's kind of an official clean slate. It's kind of a chance to completely reset and re-energize your focus. It'll be a different book. Things will be different. It'll kind of really help out instead of kind of doing the same thing. So it will be different, and hopefully that kind of helps with the second half. To keep you going, keep you energized. So today, just kind of want to go over the personal portfolio website. I gave you that assignment last week. And I kind of gave you 2 weeks, so I know a lot of people are not going to probably didn't spend a lot of time this week on that, but I wanted to give you the option if you were ahead to go ahead and get started on that. So we'll talk about that a little bit here, and then I'm going to kind of show you the plan for the remainder of the semester. Just talk about the different chapters in the book, and the written tests are a little longer than the other ones, so I kind of want to go over that real quick with you as well. And then we'll go ahead and do the chapter 1 lecture, which is Introduction to JavaScript. Okay. So as far as the personal portfolio website, so just kind of wanted to mention, this is one of the most vital assets you will create in this program. It's far more than just a project, right? It's kind of the central hub where you'll showcase all your skills, projects, and growth to potential employees or clients. So, treat your portfolio website as a kind of a living document. This could be a living website that you'll continually update throughout the entire application web development program. So every time you get a new skill or you master something, you want to kind of add that to your portfolio. And also you want to kind of find, pieces of your work, things that you felt you did good at or you enjoy doing, or that really are, just really showcase your skills. And you want to kind of be able to put those in there, either, screenshots. Obviously, it's always good to have a live version of it, or besides just a screenshot, a live version, or at least pointing to some GitHub code. Okay, we'll talk more about how to kind of get that set up so you can kind of really start building that out and maintaining that through the rest of this program. So we've already completed the first 7 weeks, right? We're on week 8. The summer course is a little bit shorter than the regular fall. Okay, just a little bit. So we just kind of have to work a little harder, unfortunately. So as far as this week, we're going to go ahead and do Introduction to JavaScript and working with functions. So we're going to do these 2 chapters. So you're going to kind of have a pretty, you'll have a lot to do this week, especially if you still have to do your whole complete web portfolio. Okay. But hopefully it won't be too bad. Let's just kind of see how things go, and you can kind of let me know how things are going. and we'll talk about that from there. But chapter one's about introduction to JavaScript, which, like I said, we're going to go over today. And then also this week, we'll go through working with functions, data types, and operators. Now, a lot of this stuff kind of sounds familiar, especially for many of the students who already did the C# course. This is kind of be easier for you. Obviously, if this is your first course in this program, this will kind of help you with the C# stuff, right? So either way, it's beneficial either way, right? It'll either be beneficial now or it'll be beneficial later, right? So anybody who's already done C#, a lot of this stuff is going, a lot of this stuff there's common, there's common knowledge around that. The concepts are somewhat similar. The programming languages are different, and we'll talk about that. But a lot of the concepts are kind of the same, so that'll really help you out. Okay. Building arrays and controlling flow. The if-else statements, the things like that. Arrays. Anybody who worked in C# already did arrays. Debug and error handling. How we use debuggers, and for JavaScript is going to be kind of completely different than what we do in the C# course. We'll go through creating the web app using the document object model, enhancing and validating forms, manipulating data and strings, arrays, and other objects. Okay. And then we may go through a little jQuery as well. And I believe I mentioned jQuery a little bit. So jQuery's kind of makes things easier. Okay. It was really very popular back before there was later versions of JavaScript, when the specification was a little more rudimentary, so to speak, and jQuery came along and made some things much easier. Well, the JavaScript specifications kind of changed. The functionality that used to not be there is now part of it. And so jQuery is not quite as important as it used to be, but jQuery is still used very extensively throughout the industry. So, we'll probably at least touch upon that to some extent, okay? So then weeks 13 through 14, that's where we're going to kind of talk about some advanced JavaScript. And these are things such as Node, which is basically a JavaScript runtime environment. So in a lot of the documentation, books, and it's always going to talk about JavaScript as being a client-side scripting language, which is very true. It's very true. But it's really not only nowadays. In its core, basically the native JavaScript, yes, you really just think of that as a client side. But when you start using things like Node and React, then you can actually use JavaScript on the server side as well. So we'll learn a little bit about that. Okay. Even though we'll still do everything on the client side, we'll do things within like Visual Studio where we're kind of separating things, and we'll talk about that when we get there. And then after that, so we're going to want to update our existing portfolio to add things that we've done through this course. It's kind of your second chance. It's kind of, even though, a lot of points on the portfolio here for this due date of July the 5th, I believe. And obviously, if you got started on it already, that's great. But, so there's 200 points for that. And then later, we'll go ahead and update your existing web portfolio. And then we'll have our final project. Okay, so that'll be like the last 2 weeks. Okay. Did want to go through written test a little bit in our new JavaScript book. The very first chapter has 52 questions, 40, so here's all the numbers, right? So a little bit more. I know that the HTML books, we kind of scaled those down because I think the first chapter had 100 questions. There was some really good big ones. What we did was we took those and kind of scaled them down to something more manageable. I think we made them all 20, right? But this one, we're just going to use what they have because, it's a little, it's quite a bit more in some cases, but, it's not all that bad here. Just a couple chapters. They're like really, really, 52 here, 45 here. But, besides that, not much more than 20, right? So just a few more questions, okay? So this kind of covers all the parts of the book where you're kind of getting maybe a little cheated because we kind of had to scale it down because there's just too many questions for the written test. So, okay. All right, so let's go ahead and start with the introduction here. Okay, so first, what is JavaScript? So JavaScript, and I know that in our HTML book, we kind of, there was an introduction to kind of JavaScript. You did do a little bit of JavaScript there, right? But this is kind of, this book, the JavaScript book is going to be all about JavaScript. So we're going to really be building upon just that, the foundation that you kind of started a little bit, okay? But so there'll be a little overlap here at the beginning, but it won't be long. We'll be way past that, okay? So JavaScript is a scripting language of the web, right? It runs directly in any modern browser. It requires no compilation step, okay? So those of you who remember that we're in C# or actually use some kind of a object-oriented programming language, you know that, you have code gets compiled, right? So for you who are already in the C# course, you remember kind of behind the scenes, it did that when we hit the start button. We talked about that, how it kind of really compiles. Under the hood, it's actually compiling that first before it actually runs it. That's why there was always that delay. It was going through that process. JavaScript is not doesn't compile, right? There's no compilation step, okay? It uses what's called an interpreter, and we'll talk about that more. But it lets you add interactivity, dynamic content, real-time behavior to HTML pages. So combined with HTML for structure and CSS for presentation, JavaScript forms the third pillar of the front-end web development, okay? So real quick here, let's see, programming languages versus scripting languages, okay? So can you say that JavaScript's a programming language? Yeah, some things, sometimes there's kind of, a little bit general type terms, yeah, you look at it. But a lot of programming, especially when you start talking object-oriented programming languages, no, JavaScript's not an object-oriented programming language, right? But a programming language is a set of instruction that directs actions on a computer. Traditional programming languages, such as, really C# probably isn't, yeah, I guess, yeah, it's still one of the traditional. Java was around before C#. So Java had success, and actually C# was like Microsoft's answer to Java. Java was created by someone at Sun Microsystems, and really became very popular in the late 90s and for many years after that, okay? C++ is kind of is a little more cryptic, I guess, just a little bit more cryptic than, say, Java. You have to control memory a lot. You have to actually control the memory. If not, you'll get like out of memory errors, right? Not that you can't get them also with other languages, but these other languages such as C# and Java have memory gets allocated, within the runtime environment that runs the thing, okay? Whereas C++, you actually have to control memory. So it takes a little bit more. A lot of your really intense games, and just some, it's a lot faster. C++ is a lot faster, okay? A lot faster than C# and Java. So anything speed's very important. C++ is always a good option, okay? But they all have to be compiled before the run. Okay, a compiler transforms the source control into machine code, and then the processor can execute directly. Okay, a scripting language is a subcategory of programming language that kind of skips the compilation entirely. Instead, an interpreter reads the code line by line as the program runs, scanning for errors in real time. Because a JavaScript interpreter is built into every modern browser, you only need a text editor and a browser to write and run JavaScript. So even though like we're using Visual Studio Code, you can just use Notepad, Notepad++. Obviously, you're not going to have all the code checking and, the editors, such as Visual Studio Code, make things a lot easier, right? Help gives you suggestions, everything else. But you can just create an HTML document, right? JavaScript, all of this can be written directly, and actually, that's actually a very good way to learn it. And a lot of schools have done that in the past, where you kind of, especially when you're in person, here's a blank thing, write all your code, right? So you have to write it, or it's not going to work, right? You're not going to catch all those errors. It's a really good way to learn, right? Obviously, it takes a lot more time. Nowadays, we have so many text editors and tools that, it's too tempting and makes things a lot quicker by using those, these other kinds of dedicated tools. Okay, so we just talked about compiled languages a little bit, okay, where you basically it has to be compiled from your source your source code, which is what you see and you write, right, into a machine code before it can run. Okay, scripting language code is read and executed line by line by an interpreter at runtime. So no separate compilation step. Besides JavaScript, there's Python is another one, very popular, especially with machine learning and AI nowadays. PHP was very early days of, not that people don't still use it, but early days of the internet. PHP was kind of one of the first ones that were kind of used a lot on the server side a little bit, all right? And then also there's Ruby as well. And these are not the only ones. These are just some of the more popular ones. Markup languages. So we already know about markup languages, right? Markup languages define the content, structure, or appearance of the documents. They're not compiled or interpreted as programs, right? HTML and CSS. So HTML defines what's on a page. CSS defines how it looks. JavaScript defines what it does. All three work together inside the browser. The role of markup languages. I know we're kind of going backwards a little bit, but this is part of the book, so just kind of wanted to kind of follow that along. So hypertext markup languages defines the content and structure of a web page, which we all know. CSS defines how that content appears on a given device. So neither HTML or CSS is a scripting language. They are markup languages, okay? It is important to be able to just say, okay, yep, this is a markup language. HTML, CSS, XML, which we haven't really done much, but we'll look at that a little bit here within this course. But XML is also a markup language as well, okay? But that's important to understand. Don't really want to say that HTML is a programming language or CSS is a programming, right? They're basically markup languages, okay? And then you've got your other programming languages, especially object-oriented programming languages, where you can create objects and things, right? Reusable objects like C++, Java, C#, and others, okay? And then you have your scripting languages such as JavaScript, right? PHP, Python, etc. Okay? And then just remember that your compiled languages, right, have to use a compiler to transform the machine code. Scripting just gets read line by line by an interpreter. Okay. Let's go here. A brief history. So JavaScript was created in 1995 by Brendan at Netscape. Netscape was, for you that don't know, Netscape Navigator was like the very first, before Internet Explorer, before, obviously Edge and Chrome. None of those were around. Okay, Netscape was one of the one of the most original ones. So, and Netscape was initially designed for the Netscape Navigator browser. Okay, JavaScript. Shortly after, Microsoft shipped a slightly modified version called JScript that ran in Internet Explorer. Okay, having two similar but different implementations created compatibility headaches for developers. So, yeah, early on it was a little more challenging, right? Before you started using these different associations and these standards bodies to kind of work through that and make things, be able to use on multiple platforms and so forth, right? Originally, actually, just to add a little bit more, JavaScript was called LiveScript at the beginning. Okay, JavaScript was called LiveScript. Then they changed the name to JavaScript. Kind of the reason behind that, and so I don't want you to get too confused, especially because we talked about that programming language called Java, and so JavaScript is not. Even though there may be some little syntax here that, oh, this kind of looks a little bit like Java and JavaScript kind of look the same, it's not the same, okay? And it's like we were already talking about, JavaScript's an interpreted language, whereas Java is a full-blown, full-fledged object-oriented programming language. Okay, there's two different ones. The reason, from what I understand, is the reason that they made the name JavaScript, used the name JavaScript for it, was because Java was already very successful, and they were just piggybacking on that success. Okay, but like this was mentioning, so Netscape had their original JavaScript, and then came Microsoft with JScript for Internet Explorer, and then for any programmer, especially if you were building for the public, that you don't know what kind of browser they're using. Where companies, especially early on, companies kind of only use this browser or use that browser, and they almost had to because of this reason, right? You don't want to, especially internal type stuff. You have a lot of internal type stuff that's just internal within your organization, and back in the day, like I said, they just use one browser, so they didn't have to deal with all that, right? Why spend all that, right? Why go through all that headache? But if you had a public website that you were, out to the public, they could be using different browsers back then, right? So you had to check, because there's ways that when you send a request, you have to check, and also within the pages, you can check, hey, what kind of browser is this? Okay, and we'll learn that later, how to be able to detect what kind of browser is being used. Okay. And based on that, it would do logic. It would, do different things based on that, right? Very, very difficult. Nowadays, you can kind of almost skip that step, right? In almost all cases. So, but back in 1997, there was the European Computer Manufacturers Association convened a technical committee of representatives from the major browser vendors to create a single standard, right? The result was ECMA script, also known as ECMA 262. JavaScript is the most important and most widely used implementation of that ECMA script standard. Okay, so the ECMA publishes a new edition of ECMA script roughly every year. Most browsers adopt new features within a year or two after each release. Okay, so that's where you do have to be careful, especially if you like to see the latest and greatest. You're really into that, and most of the stuff we'll be doing and stuff that's in books and stuff, they're not going to have the latest and greatest, right? Because it takes some time, and then you get to the you start having that problem with, well, this browser support it and this browser don't, right? Because it takes some time for the browsers to catch up, right? A lot quicker than they used to be. Okay, and we'll take a look. We'll go out and look at all these different ones, and you can see kind of some of the differences. Okay, so basically, I guess in closing on this part of the guide here, so obviously HTML is markup, right? CSS is markup and style, presentation, right? HTML's content and structure, presentation for CSS and visual design. JavaScript is for scripting, right? Behavior, interactivity, and dynamic content, right? PHP, Python, and Ruby, okay, is server-side scripting, right? These are all for on the server side. Back-end processing, database access. But these are server-side scripting, where this is basically, JavaScript was always known as a client-side built into the browsers, right? And that's what it is now, right? But like I said earlier, JavaScript using such like a node runtime environment and some of these, there's popular frameworks such as React where JavaScript has been kind of moved into the server side area as well. Okay. The DOM, the BOM, and the APIs. Okay. So the full implementation of JavaScript in a browser rests on these three foundations. Okay, so the ECMA script, the core scripting language specification, covers the syntax, data types, operators, statements, functions, and objects, okay? All managed by the ECMA International, right? The document object model describes how to access the content of a web page and respond to users' actions within the page. Specifications managed by the W3C, right? Which we're familiar with already. So as far as this document object model, so everything on a web page can be accessed, right? All of your div tags, all of your, paragraph tags, sections, anything in an HTML document can be accessed by using the document object model, and most things can be changed, right? Many things you can change colors on JavaScript. You can do all kinds of things, okay? So you have a lot of control over the document object model with JavaScript. Then there's also the BOM, which is the browser object model. This describes how to access the browser itself, the window, history, location, and screen. No formal standard, largely consistent across browsers. Okay, so this is like you can get location, right? Location, if you've got that, depends on your privacy settings and stuff like that within a browser, but it can get your location, history, things you've been to before, and window. There's a bunch of different window things like an alert that can pop up. That doesn't really belong to the HTML or the JavaScript. It belongs to the browser object model, right? It's part of that project object model. And there's a whole lot of other things as well, okay? And we'll definitely be learning some of those things. Application programming interfaces, APIs. So both the DOM and the BOM are examples of an application programming interface. An API is a defined set of procedures that allows one piece of software to access the functionality of another. The DOM API lets your JavaScript code query and modify any element on the page. Okay? The BOM API lets your code interact with the browser window itself. Okay? So think of the DOM as a live map of your entire HTML document. Every element is a node on that map, and every JavaScript can read, add, change, or remove any node at any time. Okay, so let's talk about the client-server architecture and scripting. Okay, so there's the two-tier web model. The web operates on a client-server model. A client, usually a browser, also called the front end, requests information. A server, the back end, stores, processes, and serves that information back. Communication between the two uses HTTP, which we've already gone through this, right? The Hypertext Transfer Protocol, okay? Which is the main data exchange protocol of the web, okay? So we've talked about protocols, right? Different protocols, HTTP, FTP, right? There's different ones. The Hypertext Transfer Protocol is basically the protocol of the web, right? And here's an example. Basically, your client machine, computer, phone, whatever, right? This is web browser prints UIs, runs JavaScript, sends requests. Processing tier. So usually when you make a call, it's going somewhere, right? We've talked about that with the domains, and there's domain, uh, domain servers, and it knows to where this determines where to go, and so there's a server associated with your website, with your web domain, and it's going to go to that web server, and on that web server, it's going to do some server side processing. Okay. Now, this isn't the only way to do it, and especially as time has, as we, advanced, there's many different ways to process things nowadays. This is just kind of showing you, one way, right? Having these server-side scripts that pick up a request coming in and they go from there, right? They determine where to route it to and so forth. And there's lots of different ways to do this, but this is just talking about using a PHP, Python, or Ruby is one option to handle things like that, right? Then you also have what's called data storage tier. Okay, that's the processing. This is client server, but usually you're always going to have data storage, right? And most applications that do anything really useful, usually you've got a username and a password, whereas that can be stored in a database somewhere, right? Any kind of data where you're looking up your grades or something, many different things. So all that stuff is stored on a database using some systems, right? And then the processing tier goes and either grabs data from the data storage tier or updates that data, right? If it goes ahead and just process tier might request some data, goes to the data storage tier, comes back here, and gets pushed back to the client, right? 2-tier versus 3-tier. So a 2-tier system consists of a client and a server on a separate physical computers. Okay. You can always think of a server just being a computer because that's what it is, but it's a special computer. Usually it's got special kind of software, has special hardware to make it more resilient, more, to handle multiple requests coming in, right? All depends on the software that's installed, all of that, right? So a server is also a physical computer, but it has, some certain function, right? Whereas your client computer, being a laptop, a desktop computer, a laptop, a phone, etc., right? These different clients, they have a other kind of functionality, right? You use them for other reasons, right? Basically for an individual to be looking at, right? A 3-tier system splits the server side into a processing tier called the middle tier, which handles application logic, and the data storage tier is the database, right? So the 3-tier model is conceptual rather than purely physical. Both the processing and the data tiers can run on the same hardware, okay? So yeah, let me just kind of talk about that just a little bit here on that. When you up here, it's showing this. So you can have a client tier that calls the processing, right? Calls this a web server, right? But this database could have database software installed on the server, right? But the processing tier access the data that's basically on its same server, but it uses a certain API also to access that data. And that data can be in a database, basically a software package. All databases are basically software packages that are running on that same server. So that data tier could be right there within here, and this could be shared, right? So there's advantages and disadvantages of doing that. Obviously, instead of having a separate hardware server, right, that's kind of saves you some money there. But if something goes down on this thing, if something happens to this server and you have this crashes, well, you're down with everything then, right? Okay. So that's the 3-tier. Client-side scripting. Client-side scripting means the script runs in the browser, as we talked about, on their user's machine instead of on the server. JavaScript is the primary client-side scripting language. It allows web pages to move from static, unchanging, once loaded, to dynamic and interactive. All right. And for the most part, especially since, like I did mention that kind of JavaScript can be run, really for now, really you need to kind of focus more on right now, especially these chapters in the book that JavaScript is a client side, front end, runs in the browser, right? Runs on an individual person's machine on that client, right? All right. Security rules restrict what JavaScript can do. Scripts cannot freely access the local file system, cannot communicate with unrelated servers without permission, and cannot bypass browser security boundaries. Okay, these restrictions protect users from malicious web pages. Server-side scripting runs on the web server, not in the browser. When a client requests a server-side script, the web server scripting engine interprets and runs it, then returns the result to the client as HTML. Right? Server-side languages include, ones we already talked about. You will learn ASP.NET in the second year of this program. Okay, so that's very relevant there. JavaScript itself cannot directly access a back-end database, okay, from the browser, and that access requires a server-side component. Okay. Choosing client side versus server side. A useful rule of thumb: let your client handle the user interface and light processing. Input validation, showing, hiding elements, formatting output. Let the server handle intensive calculations and data storage. Right? Processing work on the client reduces the server load, lowers infrastructure cost, and makes applications feel faster because fewer round trips of the server are needed. Okay? Best on the client, form validation, right? Dynamically UI updates where you click something. We've already done this in the, that last chapter with JavaScript where, the FAQs for that one assignment where you click on it and it'll show or display, it toggles display or hide, right? Animation and visual feedback, managing cookies and browser side. And on the browser side, we'll talk about managing cookies as well later on in the course. I do want to mention best on the client. So what's really important is you really want to, whatever you can validate on your front end, you want to kind of validate that, okay? But what you also want to do, okay, just kind of a tip that probably won't be covered in this book so much. But whatever you check on the front end, you want to check that also on the back end. Just because if something bypasses the JavaScript, you don't want to validate something that, because a lot of things, you want to make sure that you don't have malicious code and stuff like that, right? Or fake data, all of that. So you really you can't just do that front end validations without doing some validations on your back end too. You really should check everything a second time. Everything that checks on the front end also gets checked on the back end, right? Because it's possible that JavaScript can be bypassed, and actually JavaScript can be disabled in your browser. And you'd be amazed at how many people actually have this JavaScript disabled in their browser. Obviously, the vast percentage of people don't, but there are quite a few people still out there that disable JavaScript, right? So anything that you write in JavaScript, if it's disabled, it's not going to work. And a lot of sites won't even be useful without JavaScript enabled, right? But so it's still sometimes possible to get beyond that, get past that JavaScript, right? So whenever you do some validations on the front end, you also want to do those on the back end, right? So what's best on the server? Database reads and writes, right? Complex calculations. Secure authentication logic, right? That's where you authenticate the user, right? You are who you are, right? And then that's authentication, right? Authorization. The big things for this is like authentication, authorization. Authentication, are you who you say you are, right? Right. So that's where you use your username and your password and different codes that you might have, right? Pins and so forth. That's all about authentication. Then once you get into a system, usually there's authorization there's authorization type frameworks, right? There's things to check your authorization. What can you access, right? So certain users can access certain things in a system where other users cannot, and that's called authorization. Okay. File storage and retrieval. Okay. Yep. Anything stored in a file. All right. You want to have that all handled on your server side. Makes things much more secure. Right. So writing JavaScript programs. Right. Two categories of tools are commonly used to write JavaScript. Some of this is, I know a little bit of a review here, but an integrated development environment is an IDE, right? A full-featured application that manages all aspects of web development, including writing, running, debugging, and testing. JavaScript IDEs often include project management, version control, live preview features, right? A code editor is a lightweight tool focused on writing code. It offers features like syntax, highlighting, right, such as color coding keywords, strings, and variables, and line numbering without the overhead of a full IDE, right? Visual Studio Code is a popular free example that blurs the line between an editor and IDE, right? So Visual Studio Code really has all like those plugins to give you extra functionality. But at the heart of it, a Visual Studio Code, right? Visual Studio Code is a code editor, right? Not an IDE. Now, for you who come from the C# course, right? We use Visual Studio 2026, right? That is a integrated development environment IDE, right? You can build, compile, all of that can happen there, right? So a lot more. But, as time has progressed here, Visual Studio Code, with all the different plugins and all of that, you can do a lot more, right? And like I said, it kind of blurs that line, right? A basic editor would just be like Notepad could be an editor, Notepad++. And there's a bunch of other little small, freely available and some cost money, little code editors that are available, right? But IDEs are much more broad-based. You can do much more things. That's where you can compile code, etc., right? Usually they're a lot slower. They take up much resources on your computer, and they're a lot slower, right? Visual Studio Code carries a very smaller footprint, right, so to speak. And that's kind of what we're using in this class. The script element. Script element is embedded in HTML using the script element tag, right? Place statements between the opening and closing tags. A statement is a single instruction in a JavaScript program. Statements are not technically required to end with a semicolon, but it's widely considered best practices to include one. Semicolons are strictly necessarily only when two statements appear on the same line. For best practices, always end every JavaScript statement with a semicolon. It signals a clear boundary between instruction and prevents subtle bugs caused by JavaScript automatic semicolon insertion. Okay. JavaScript objects, properties, and methods. JavaScript is an object-based language. Okay. Even though it's saying it's object-based, it's not called a, just kind of want to it's mention it that it's really not a full-fledged object-based language. It's a little bit different than that. So an object, but it does have object-type properties, object-type functionality. An object is a combination of a programming code and data treated as a single unit. Objects have properties. They have methods. Okay. Properties are pieces of data associated with the object, such as color, name, size. Methods or procedures, functions that objects can perform. Okay. This is just showing you to access a property, use the name of your object and then the name of your property. Calling a method, basically to call a method, here's whatever your object name is and then your method name, and then any kind of arguments you want to pass in. Assigning a value to a property, basically the name of your object, dot whatever the property name is, and then whatever value you want to pass in. Okay. So an argument is a specific piece of information passed to a method inside the parentheses. Some methods require arguments, others do not. When you supply arguments to a method, you are passing arguments. Okay? The document write method. The document object represents the current web page. Its write method adds new text content to a page while the browser is loading it. The argument must be a text string contained in quotation marks. Okay? So here's a document write. Okay? And this will write out a paragraph. Okay? It will write out a paragraph with welcome to our store. Wherever the script tag is within your HTML markup. So use document write for only small snippets. It'll, in the most cases, just for learning purposes, yeah. Besides that, once you get past some introductory understanding, there's much better ways to do this, right? But for now, yeah, your assignments are going to ask you to do a lot of this, okay? So it's there for you to kind of understand. Obviously, once you start progressing, there's better ways to handle some of that stuff, okay? Only for small snippets of dynamic content, and that's why it's kind of saying that, right? Add it during initial page load, okay? For updating page content after that, after the page are loaded, you used document.getElement by ID, right? So a document.write, so when a page loads, document.write, it's gonna write that out when it reaches that line, right? And the problem with using maybe document.getElement by ID on an initial page load, right? If that page hasn't loaded completely, obviously we've already learned a little bit that we can control that, but you want to make sure your whole document is, if you're writing something to your page, you want to make sure that that whole document object model has been loaded, right? That whole web page has been loaded before you start doing this, because it may not be able to find that ID if it's not there yet, right? Even though from our perspective, viewing things kind of load fast, right? Sometimes, especially you got a very good connection, you have a very good connection, especially in the days of fiber and that, things are much faster, but there is still a little delay, right? There's still a delay, even though humanly you might not see it as much, there's still a delay, right? So it's very important that the whole page loads before you try to get things by certain IDs and so forth. So case sensitivity. JavaScript is case sensitive language. The interpreter treats document and document as two entirely different identifiers. JavaScript built-in object names must be all lowercase. Document, window, console, right? A common beginning error is capitalizing these object names incorrectly. Comments or lines or portions of lines that the JavaScript interpreter ignores. They are notes that you and other developers who read the code, right? So most of you already have learned this, but so for JavaScript, when you're within a tag, so how we do HTML comments are different, right? But once you're in a script, either in a separate JavaScript file, right? Then you use comments like this, or within the script tag of your HTML document, okay? Once you put that script tag, then you can use this, right? If your comment is outside the script tag in HTML, that's where you have to do your exclamation points, right? The ones that start with your bracket, exclamation point, those kind, right? But for JavaScript's the same as what's in C# and many other programming languages. This is how you do it in many languages. Not Python, though. That's one that's a little different. But, for C# and Java and JavaScript, you use the double / for a single line. And for a block, you use the / asterisk, and then you make sure you end this, right? And you have to be careful if you always have comments within comments and stuff, that can get things a little messed up. So you make sure that you correctly terminate the beginning of your comment, right? So you have to watch that. Okay. And then also here's the idea. So this could be, you can have this comment right before you have a line after that, right? This is just for a block, like we said. This, you can have a comment right at the end of your statement, right? Not that you couldn't even do it before it, but that's usually not best practices. Best practices, if you're going to want to do an inline comment like this, you want to do it after your statement, right? Variables and constants. So what is a variable? A variable is a named storage location in your computer's memory. Right? Programs store values in variables, read them back, and change them as the program runs. Before a variable can be used, it must be declared, which reserves a location in memory. Optionally, it can be initialized at the same time by assigning it a starting value. Naming variables identifiers. The name you give to a variable is called its identifier. Identifiers must follow these rules. Must begin with an uppercase or a lowercase ASCII letter. Okay? And let's bring up an ASCII. Let me bring up an ASCII thing just to look at that real quick. So here's an ASCII character code table here. It's not showing all of them, right? The standard ASCII character set contains exactly 128 characters. Okay, so you got your different binary numbers and your English alphabet, etc. Right? So here they are. So here's the decimal equivalent of, right? This is just showing you what these different ones are. This is for a null character, start of a heading, start of a text, right? Carriage return, shift out, all of these, right? Here, actually, you do have HTML numbers. Remember, we've done that as well, right? Let's see. And then we start getting into, here's a space, right? Exclamation point, a quote, etc. We start getting into our numbers here, right? Our different brackets, and as you can notice, we've got the different HTML numbers and the name too, right? Because we've used both of these already. We've already done that, right? We've done that a little bit, the number and the name, right? In our HTML markup. So then, then you move into your letters, all your uppercase letters. There are some other special characters and all your lowercase numbers, etc. Right? These are all the ASCII characters, right? And so for these, there's all, it's all used by. There's also to be able to relate these. You have a decimal equivalent of it. You have an octal equivalent. So for a decimal equivalent, right? For an L is a 76, then an octal, right? Then a hex, right? This is called binary. This is the basic binary computer instruction, right? Binary level, right? So these are all used, right, for different purposes, right? For every letter, for every ASCII character. All right. But it must begin with uppercase or lowercase ASCII letter or a $sign. Okay, $sign or underscore. Them are your options. Okay, so here you can't. Right? Cannot contain digits, right? After the first character. Can contain, yeah. But you cannot put a number first. Okay? You only can use a lowercase ASCII letter, upper or a lowercase letter, right? As we looked at in the ASCII thing, uppercase or lowercase letter, a $sign or an underscore. That's the very first, right? Very first character. Can contain letters and digits after that first character. Okay? Cannot contain spaces, right? So you can't put in on a variable, you can't put in brackets, you can't put in parentheses, all that in a name, right? Basically, uppercase, lowercase letter to start, $sign, underscore to start, right? Any of those. Then after that, they just can be digits, right? After that. Cannot contain spaces, no spaces. Cannot use JavaScript reserved words. Okay, there's some reserved words in JavaScript, like let and const and so forth, right? They're case sensitive. Price and price are two different variables, right? Best practices, you always want to start out with a lowercase letter for a lowercase letter, right? You really don't want to write uppercase in that case, right? Best practice is camel case. By convention, JavaScript variables names use camel case, right? First letter is always lowercase, with each additional word starts with an uppercase letter, right? Total price, student first name, item count, right? This makes multi-word names readable without spaces. Okay, here's some of the reserved words. So you can't use these as the name of your variable, right? Obviously, you can use it as part of your variable name, but you can't have a variable named await or break or case, etc. Right? These all have special meaning. They're either used or they're actually reserved to not used, right? So here are all of them. And some of these, especially like you come from C sharp already, some of these are already looking familiar, right? Like break, case, catch, class, right? Continue, else, do, enum, right? For, finally. Lots of these you've already seen before. So that definitely helps, right? Declaring variables. So when you declare variables, there's like 3 different options. Let, var, and const. Var is more the older style, and you really want to try to avoid that at all costs going forward. But keep that in mind. Nothing wrong with learning it, but really there's no reason to use it. It causes some problems with scope and that. Let and const is really all you really need. Okay. So here's a let. So this is your variable, declaring your variable. So the name of your variable is product name, and you're saying it's a type let. Okay. So you don't have to initialize a value. Sometimes you don't want to initialize a value. You might want to define it at the top of your file, and then you do different functions, and it kind of gets changed throughout your, depending on what happens on that page, right? It can change, right? So here's you can do both together if needed, right? And here you're saying a product name is a laptop. Here is a declare multiple variables in one statement. Price, if you comma separate it, price, quality, and stock, right? You're making them all be lets, right? It's okay to do this. I don't know. I tend to always kind of do it line by line, but this is definitely okay to do. Using var. This is kind of older style, different scoping rules. Okay, so you kind of really want to avoid this at all costs, but this is kind of a legacy way to do it. It can cause some problems. Okay, constant. Constant value cannot be reassigned after declaration. Use the const keyword here. All right, and here's the tax rate. Common to use all uppercase, right? In this format. Back in the day, before there was, before let and const were available, everything was a var, right? And so whenever you did a constant, usually used it like the var tax rate, so you could easily see being all uppercase like that. Oh, yep, in your head you think, oh, yep, this is a constant, but it's still very helpful as well, especially if you define it at the top and you use it later in your code. It's nice to know just by looking at something in your code, oh yeah, this is a constant. I know because it's defined like this, right? But once you assign this a value, you cannot reassign it. Okay, the browser will complain about that, and it will let you know that. All right, keyword let. Is it reassignable? Yes. What's its scope? It has block scope. Okay. Most variables may change value. Okay. Const, can you reassign it? No. It also has block scope. Value should never should never change, right? Tax rates, fixed URL. So you have to think about, well, you know, you make something a const when you say, there's no reason for this to ever change in this file, right? So that's when you decide to use a const. If it's something that you're constantly going to be changing, then obviously it needs to be a let, right? And then as far as var has a function global scope, right? And then it's kind of legacy, prefer let in your new code, right? And when I say this global scope, so what can kind of cause a problem with this is, especially when you're reading in maybe different files, and sometimes, you might be using some other libraries and stuff where you read that whole JavaScript file into your page. And so anything that's kind of defined, it can kind of mess up with that, having that global scope. It could overwrite something, or something else could overwrite that if it's using the same name. So you got to be very, very careful with that. Okay. So you want to prefer const by default. So most of the time, what you really need to do is think: is there any reason that this shouldn't be defined as a const, right? And basic short for constant, right? Is this a constant? Right? If there's, why wouldn't this be a constant? If there's a good reason, then you use let, right? When you know the value needs to be reassigned. So, and it's just saying reserve var only for situations where you're maintaining older code, right? And even then, you think you probably want to be careful and update that with using lets if you're adding some new functionality, right? But yep. So, but it's very possible you're going to go, be working somewhere, and also you open up a file, you see a bunch of vars, right? A lot of vars in them. Building expressions with variables. So expressions, operators, and operands, right? An expression is any combination of literal values, of variables, operators, and other expressions that the interpreter can evaluate to produce a single result. Expressions are the building block of calculations and logic in JavaScript. So a literal is a fixed value written directly in the code, such as the number 42 or the word hello, right? Variable is a name, storage location whose value can change. An operand, any literal or variable appearing in an expression. An operator, a symbol such as a plus, minus, plus, minus, multiplication, right? Star, asterisk for multiplication, forward slash for division, and an equal sign that so a symbol that performs an operation on operands, right? So you're going to have your left operand, a right operand, and you'll have an operator right in the middle. The assignment operator is the equal sign. Okay, assigns a value on the right side to the variable on the left side. It does not mean equal to in a mathematical sense. Yep. And so, it's very important here. This is an easy mistake to make, and I've seen it multiple times. I've made this mistake before. You're just coding, and instead of checking for something being equal to, you actually end up reassigning something to a new value. Whenever you use one equal sign, it's going to assign a value, right? You're going to check, if you want to check if two things are equal, you have to have at least, there's either two equal signs or three equal signs. We'll talk about more what that is. But if there's two, you have to have at least two equal signs to evaluate, right? Otherwise, you are assigning a value. Okay, so here's some different variables where you're assigning values, right? Here's a number, there's a number. These are all numbers, right? A couple lets and one const. Here's an arithmetic expression assigned to a new variable. So you got subtotal, tax amount, and total. So you're taking the base price and adding the shipping cost, right? Tax amount here using a base price and multiplying it by the tax rate. Here you've got a total where you're taking the subtotal plus the tax amount. Okay. String concatenation with the plus sign, right? The plus operator serves two roles. When used with two numbers, it adds them together. When either operand is a text string, it concatenates, joins both values as strings. Okay? So here you've got first name being Maria. You've got a greeting being hello, right? Hello, and then you're concatenating the first name, Maria, and adding a exclamation point. So in this case, a plus sign plus a plus sign. This is used for concatenation, not for adding. Mixing a number and a string produces a string. So this is something very important to understand here. Right? So if you're doing a let score equal 10, let message your score plus score. In this case, even though you've got a number, because it's a string here, it's going to just concatenate. Okay? So the result score is 10, right? Well, the result is your score is 10. Score is converted to a string. So JavaScript does that behind the scenes, under the cover, so to speak, right? Under the hood. It's going to do a conversion. It's going to say, oh, here's a number. Oh, here's a string. We can't add the string and then a number together, so we're going to concatenate it. Okay? So mixing a number with a string with the plus sign always produces a string, not a number. Okay? 10, the number 10 plus the string 10 evaluates to 1010, right? It doesn't add those. Okay? So keep data types consistent when performing arithmetic. Modifying a variable's value. Okay? You can assign a variable at any point after its declaration. Simply use the assignment operator with the variable's existing name. No keyword is needed again. So once you define a variable, right, give it a value of 5 here. Now later, I can change that variable to a different number. Okay. Also, you can increment or decrement, right? So in this case, you're taking item count. My item count equals the original, right? Well, basically, the right way to say this is get the item count, add 1 to it, and put that value back into item count. Okay. So now item count will be, okay, well, in this case, item count was 5. Then you changed it to 8. So when you come down to this line, this item count is going to be 8. You're going to add 1 to it, and now it's 9. Right? Back to the common operators. So addition and concatenation. All the rest are just pretty much straightforward, right? Mathematically, subtraction, multiplication, division. Modulus is remainder, right? So 5 goes into 15, 3 times what's left over? 2, right? So always remember this is what's left over, the remainder, okay? Modulus is very helpful with doing things such as on web pages, such as alternating lines. Obviously nowadays, with CSS and that, we kind of did a little bit where you can alternate lines using CSS and that. But you can also do the same with JavaScript as well, okay? A JavaScript function can do those things. And you very good for using modulus where you've got a row count. So you can get, like if you have a table and you have TR rows, right? Table rows, TR tags. Using the document object model, you can get a list of all of the table rows, right? You'll know which ones and store them in an array. And then when you can loop through those and say, for every even one, right? We want to make it this color. Every odd one, we want to make it this color. And that's when modulus is very helpful for things like that. Or every third row or every fifth row, you can always do things like that with modulus, right? Exponential. Exponentiation, right? So here you use the double asterisk, right? So 2 exponentiation 8 equals 256. It's 2 8 times, right? 2 times 2 times 2 times 2, 8 times is 256. Assignment, we already went through that. Basically one equal sign assigns 10 to the variable x here, right? Okay, understanding events and event handlers. So, what is an event? An event is a specific circumstance monitored by JavaScript. When your script can respond to, right? Events can originate from user actions, clicking, typing, scrolling, from the browser itself, a page finishing its load, right? That's another on-page load, right? After it loads, boom, right? Then you can do something. An image failing to load, okay? If an image fails to load, you can do something, or when it loads, or from a device, like a tablet or something, or a phone, a touch gesture on a mobile screen is another type of event, right? So not all events work on all devices, right? So events such as key down or key up are triggered only by physical keyboards. Events like touch start and touch end occur on touchscreen devices. Choosing events that work across devices such as click, which fires from both mouse clicks and screen taps, is important for building accessible cross-platform applications. Event handlers as HTML attributes. One way to respond to an event is by adding an event handler attribute directly to an HTML element. The attribute name combines the prefix on with the name event on click, on mouse over, on blur, etc. The attribute value contains the JavaScript code to run when the event fires. Here's an example, event handler attribute. Okay, you got an on event, JavaScript code here. Right? Single quotes inside a attribute value wrap the string argument. So here you've got a button. Okay, we're doing a window thing here. So remember we talked about the document object model, and we talked about the BOM, which is the browser object model, right? Two different things. Window is part of the browser object model, right? Part of the BOM, right? It's outside of your HTML document, right? Kind of think of it as the parent of your, the browser object model holds on to that document object model. Okay, and this is an alert. This is basically a built-in Windows alert. It's part of the window object. That's part of the browser object model. Right. When it says window here, don't think Windows is like Microsoft Windows. Think of it as the window that you're viewing. Right. So here's another example where you've got a H2 tag, right? A heading 2 tag. When you do a mouse over, it's going to change the color. Mouse out, it's going to, right? It's going to get rid of that color. When a JavaScript string is inside an HTML attribute wrapped in double quotes, use single quotes around any literal screens in JavaScript code. This avoids quote conflicts. Yeah, it is very important to do this. So if you're gonna, the most important thing is you need to be consistent. So for JavaScript in general, like here you got a double quote here, double quote there. You can use it single quotes, but really you want to make sure that if you do is if let's say you've got a double quote here, and then you put a double quote here. That's going to terminate this, right? That's going to cause a problem. Okay? So in this way, what you're doing here is this double quote is not terminated until here. Okay? So then it's going to read all of this as one piece, right? This is terminated here, right? So this is separate. Okay? Otherwise, you're going to have an error. So if you want to make this a single quote here, okay, so that's an option. But then you need to put this in double quotes, okay? You need to put this in double quotes. So keep that in mind. Kind of the same thing here. It's showing you where you're using a single quote here. You want to make sure that you don't accidentally put a double quote here and then also a double quote here. Because once you put that double quote, you're kind of you're kind of terminating that line at that point. You're terminating the text at that point. not that line, but you're terminating whatever's there at that point. You don't want to terminate it, right? You don't want to terminate it until here, right? That's where you go ahead and use the single quotes in this case. All right. The window alert. So the window alert object represents a browser window, all right? Its alert method displays a dialog box containing a message and an OK button. When the dialog appears, the page is paused until the user clicks OK. So basic alert with a text message, all right? Here's an alert combining a literal and a value, right? So you can add things to it. Here you're concatenating, right? Doing some little bit of concatenation, okay? And there is another way to do that we'll talk about later, okay? Accessing, other ways to do concatenation. Accessing page elements. So the DOM method, document, whenever you see document, we're talking about the document object model, right? When you're thinking about here window, you're thinking about the browser object model. The BOM, right? This is the DOM. So the DOM method, document.getElementById, locates any HTML element by its value of ID attribute, right? Once you have a reference to an element, you can read or change any of its property, right? So in this case here, get element by ID, element ID property, okay, dot property, dot new value. Just showing you you're not using the word actually dot property or dot new value. This is whatever property you give it, right? It could be, color. It depends on what it is, right? What's available, important thing is you're actually, when you do this, you are getting, so let's say you're getting a div, an ID of a div, right? What you're getting is that object, right? You're getting that HTML element, that whole thing. It's kind of an object. It's self-contained. It has all kinds of different values, right? That ID has it has a value. It could have a lot of different options there, right? It could hold on to different things, right? But it is holding on to one specific ID, right? And then, whatever property. So maybe it could be let me see if we got an example here. It's kind of showing you that. I'll just show you in the demos on that. But depending on what kind of property, you're setting a new value on it, right? So HTML, here's an image. You got to give it an ID of photo, product photo, right? It has a source. It has an alt, right? So now, it's kind of showing you this here. I wasn't really paying attention so much. So here you got document get element by ID, a product photo, right? Product photo is going to be here. Now it's holding on to that HTML element. It's holding on to that element, all of its properties, attributes, everything that makes up that element, okay? Right? And one of the properties on that, on a image, okay, a source isn't necessarily going to be on everything, right? If you get it, maybe like a div tag in that, it's not going to have a source tag. The source tag is one that belongs to the image element, right? So on that, here's a property on that image element, and you're saying, I want to change the source. So basically what this will do is, here's one picture, right? One photo, one image, whatever. You're changing it. You could have it one way. It could already have one. Right here, saying I've got a default JPEG, right? So that's currently what it is. And then once you click a button, it's going to flip that and change it to a different image. Obviously, you have to have those images within your file structure for it to find it, but right, that's how that can work. Okay. Okay. Common event references. Basically, click for non-click, on mouse over, on mouse out, on key down, on key up, on change, on load, on blur, on focus, on touch start. Okay. Structuring and externalizing scripts. Where to place your script elements. So a script element can be placed anywhere in an HTML document, right? It could be in the head section. It can be inside the body. However, placement matters for reliability. If a script references a page element that has not yet been created when the script runs, an error occurs. So many developers place scripts at the very end of the body, just before the closing body tag. And if you recall from when we were doing Bootstrap, that was kind of the directions. That's how they kind of handle that. Make sure you just put that right there at the end, so you know the whole page is loaded before you try to run any JavaScript, right? That JavaScript was there for some certain functions that are available in Bootstrap, right? So the entire DOM is built before any script runs. Alternately, external scripts can be loaded with the defer attribute to achieve the same effect. Okay? Which was a nice addition, right? I don't know when they added that. I'll have to look. Okay, but for many, many years, that wasn't available. It's nice to have that defer. So you just have a script, you have to defer, the whole page is going to load before you run that, right? Multiple script sections. And I don't know why Bootstrap, maybe just because it was already traditionally they did it that certain way, because you would think, well, why don't you just use defer? Because defer is nice. I like the idea of keeping things in the head section so it's all together. Otherwise, and it's saying that you can try to drop it anywhere in your code. You kind of, especially anything external, probably best just to have that all at the top so you kind of understand. And because sometimes, and especially you're doing a whole bunch of things, one thing can override another too, especially when we're talking about that var variables. That's why it's always good to use like let or const so you don't overwrite things. Var variables, especially using older stuff, you can kind of mess some things up. That's why you don't want to use that var variables. Multiple script sections. So an HTML file can contain multiple script elements. All right. Variables declared in an earlier script are accessible in all scripts that follow, even if they are separated by blocks of HTML code. Think of them as one connected program split across multiple sections. External JavaScript files. So JavaScript can be stored in a separate file with a .js extension and linked to an HTML page using the source attribute of the script element. This approach promotes code reuse, keeps files organized, and allows the same script to be shared across multiple pages. And you've already done this, I know, in the HTML book. In that last chapter, you did a little bit of more there, last couple chapters. So once a link is created, future changes are made only in the JavaScript file, right? All that about that separation of concerns, and especially some companies, depends on the company, may have people who do a lot of the styling, the HTML, all the creative, the HTML, the CSS. They may not do a lot of that JavaScript coding, right? That might be done by a different person with a different role, right? JavaScript front end web developer, that could, and companies have all kinds of different. What a web developer means at one company can mean different. That's just the way it is. But at some companies, especially larger companies or more complex projects, they may have the person who's doing the HTML, CSS could be a different person who's doing the JavaScript, right? So that helps with the separation of concerns where, you just keep that JavaScript all in a separate file outside of there, right? Good reason for that, right? The defer and the async attributes. So both attributes modify when an external linked script is loaded and executed. Neither attribute has any effect on the embedded inline scripts, right? So yeah, when you use that defer and that async, that's only to do with that file that you're defining within that script element, that specific one, right? Everything, if you just do a document.write within a beginning and end script tag or anything else you do, other places on your file on your file that defer, the async has nothing to do with that, right? Defer. So HTML is fully parsed first, right? The HTML is fully parsed, then the script is executed. Scripts that interact with DOM, equivalent to placing the scripts that interact with the DOM, right? Best used for scripts that interact with the DOM, equivalent to placing the script at the bottom of a page, right? like I said, I kind of really like the idea of having that in the head section, so you got all your JavaScript, you know where it is, instead of people put it in different places. The async, HTML and the script file download together. When the script finishes downloading, HTML parsing pauses and the script executes, then HTML parsing resumes. So when to use this for independent scripts like analytics, ads that do not depend on the DOM or other scripts. Okay. So from our purposes, either we're using defer or not using defer, and sometimes, when you get some things that don't work, that's always something that you can do that you probably should think. Like you're loading something, you think your JavaScript's right, nothing looks wrong. It's just not working like you expect, because maybe you're doing some kind of get elements by ID or whatever, and it's not there yet, right? So add defer is kind of a good thing to do, so then you can make sure that that whole page is loaded, right? JavaScript libraries. A library is a JavaScript source file containing pre-written reusable code for common tasks. You incorporate a library just like any other external script. You link to your JS file in your script element. Well-known libraries include jQuery, Node.js. I was already talking about that. Modernizer is a feature detection for determining what features a browser supports. There's tons and tons of different libraries for creating graphics and everything else. Okay, we won't be, jumping into all of those. We're just kind of be working a lot of the foundational stuff. We will be learning a little bit about jQuery and a little bit about Node, etc. But we won't be really getting into a lot of different libraries that are available. Right? Them are kind of add-ons. So validating web pages, a web browser can attempt to render any HTML it receives. So we've done this already, right? Validation parsers, the validator.w3.org. So it validates your HTML regularly during development, catching markup languages, right? Trace bugs when JavaScript later tries to access elements on the browser. So it's not going to validate your JavaScript. It's really just about your markup, right? So C data and PC data. In HTML, the content inside your script element is treated as what's called character data, right? A section of a document that is not interpreted as markup, okay? So it's going to be, real quick here, let me restate this again. In HTML, the content inside your script element is treated as character data, which is a section of a document that is not interpreted as markup, okay? So when you have that begin and end script tag, it's nothing in there is going to be treated as markup language, right? It's just going to be treated as what's called character data, okay? Validators ignore the section when checking an HTML element, right? In XHTML, an older, stricter XML-based variant of HTML, right? The same content is treated as parse character data, PC data. The validator attempts to interpret it as markup. Okay, this causes JavaScript code containing special characters like that to break validation. To fix this, wrap the whole script in a CD data section so the validator ignores it. Okay, so in most cases, not needed in standard HTML5, right? Just letting you know that it's there. You may run across that in some code someday, so just pointing that out, okay? If you're writing standard HTML5 with a doc type HTML, you do not need CData sections around the scripts. The CData technique is relevant only when working with XHTML documents, okay? All right. Quick reference, we'll go ahead and do this. So scripting language is interpreted line by line. No compilation, right? ECMA script is the standard JavaScript, the standard, right? JavaScript is the most important implementation, right? ECMA script has more than just JavaScript, but JavaScript is the most important one of those, okay? DOM is the document object model, the API for accessing and modifying page content, right? Basically, it's accessing everything from that first HTML tag to the end HTML tag, right? The BOM is the API accessing the browser features, right? We already seen the alert, but you also can look at other things as well as the other properties of that besides just the window, right? We looked at the window, it had the alert, but also history, location, also what browser you're using. It has access. You can actually read what browser you're using, okay? Or actually what if it's a compliant type browser. We'll look at that later. But there's lots of different functionality that's available in the BOM, okay? Client-side scripting, scripts that run in the browser, handles UI and light processing. Server-side scripting are scripts that run on the server, accesses the database, heavy logic, right? Embedding JS using the script tag, right? Variable declaration, let. When you want to change something, first you want to start out thinking when you're ready to create a variable, right? You want to think what is the purpose of this? Is this something that needs to change? If you say, maybe at the beginning you say, let's just make this a const, and then later on you say, oh, now we're going to have to change this, then you can change it to a let. But you should always kind of start with a const. It's going to be something fixed, okay? If it needs to change, you make it a let and try to avoid vars as much as possible. Even though some of our assignments are going to have you look using some vars and stuff, you kind of want to avoid that. Camel case, conventions for multi-word identifiers, right? Where you make the letter of the second word uppercase. Always start with lowercase, right? Always remember you can't start with a number, right? You can't start with a lot of special characters. You can't start with a $sign. You can start with an underscore, but besides that, that's about it, right? Either a lowercase letter here, uppercase letter, a $sign, or an underscore, right? Event handler. So an event handler, here's an inline one where you've got an on-click event, right, for a button. An alert dialog, window.alert, right? So this is what? This is part of the BOM, right? The BOM has this window object, right? And then it has this alert functionality that is alert. So that alert's actually running in that browser object model, right? Based on that browser object API, right? It's really outside the DOM, even though you're passing things in there from the DOM. The document, DOM element access, document, right? Whenever you see document, think DOM. Document.getElement by ID, passing them whatever name of your ID is. Right? And that's going to get you that element, right? And everything that belongs to that element. That element could have a background color, could have it's going to have a value, could have a name, it could have all kinds. And we looked at that image tag. You could have a source name, others as well, right? It can have a lot of different things. External script. So when you use the source like this is pointing to some external script. And then obviously this has to be, if this is in a separate folder, right? It needs to have that folder name first, right? This is going to be relative to your HTML file, right? How is your file structure set up, right? You may have it in a different directory, so you'll have to reference that correctly, right? In this case, you're not deferring anything, right? If you put a space here and add defer, or you can put defer right here. Obviously, it's always good to be consistent, but add defer, and that's the script's going to execute after the HTML is parsed. Async. Script downloads alongside HTML, runs immediately when ready, okay? And that's really used more for, other kinds of analytics and ads and stuff like that. Well-formed HTML follows all language rules. Yeah, we all know about that. Okay, so that's all I have on this guide. So next, we're going to go ahead and look at a demo. Okay. So let's go ahead and look at this. See what this looks like here. Okay, just got this. This is a pretty simple demo. It's kind of an introductory chapter. We're showing some things here. It's pretty short, actually. The one for the next chapter would be a lot better. But we're going to go ahead and look at some of these, basically some of this stuff. How this is written on the page, etc. So let's just go ahead and let me get this in the right area here. Get rid of that. So obviously we have a separate script here, separate file, and a lot of times you actually want to have that in a separate directory called scripts or JavaScript. All right, let me make that smaller. I think I'm going to change something here. Okay, and so here we got a index.html file. Just our basic template type thing. And let's see here. Different ways to do this, right? So in this one, what we're doing is we're adding an external. We're also adding defer to here, right? You could also keep this up in the head section, okay? Here's just one way to do that. So here's your external file linked here with the defer attribute, which means it keeps downloading. Keep downloading this file in the background while parsing the rest of the HTML, but don't run it, all right? Don't run it until everything's been completely downloaded. All the HTML has been rendered to the screen, okay? All right. Now you could just add this exactly up there in the head section as well. All right, let's see here. So over here on the right, here's our Pixel Arcade, show our variables. Let's look at some of our code here. Let me bring this up. All right, so we're not going to worry about the CSS too much here. All right. So let's see. Let's kind of like diagnose what's going on a little bit. So here we got this button, right? Check to see the current values of the variables declared with let const and var, right? So how do we, different ways we go and show our variable names. You can right click and go view the inspect, right? Different ways to find where that is. We're just going to go to the file exactly where that is though. We're going to find our button here. We got a bunch of script and it's complaining about a couple things. It's missing a recommended type attribute. Yep, some things are missing here. So what you're really supposed to do here on this for buttons, okay, you're supposed to really do type. There's different kinds. There's going to be type submit. There's different options here, okay. I'm going to do type and just do button here, right? And that's why it's complaining, because there's different options that will be available. It's telling you, hey, you need to tell me which one it is. Even though this will work, we're just going to treat it as a default button. It's best to have that here. I don't know what happened there. Oh, I know what I did there. Okay. And sometimes it's going to also always complain about inline styles, right? So this is that HTML validate. Just kind of complaining about inline styles, just suggesting there's a better way to do that, right? But it's not a bad idea to understand the inside styles as well, right? Okay. So we fixed those up. We're going to leave the style stuff because it's there, and it's only complaining about one thing, and that's that inside style. Okay, so we have our HTML button here, right? Variables and constants. Let's find, where's our first button? We want our show variables. So here we have an on-click event. Let's go into on show variables, right? So this could be either one of two places. You could have this within your code somewhere, right? Here it's kind of got some variables it put in here, right? Let's see. In this case, we've actually got the script right here within our thing, right? Different reasons for doing different things, right? Just kind of showing you options here. Obviously, in a lot of cases, best just to keep things separate if possible, but there may be some reasons you want to have it included, okay? So in this case, this has got to show variables, right? So let's see what this thing does, okay? This has got a let variable for calling output, and you're doing a button concatenation, concatenating all these different strings. So your very first statement in the line, which is right here, right, is pixel, okay, it's reading this. This is your static content, and this is whatever the value of this variable is. And if you're going to look up at the top, it's going to, arcade is going to be pixel arcade, right? And then this here, when you do a \n, it's going to be new line. If you don't do a \n, it'll put it on the same line, okay? It's going to put it on the same line. So by doing that, you're going ahead and here's your static, here's whatever your variable is, right? And then you've got a new line character, you're going to the next line, right? But you are doing a concatenate. You're doing, so what this does, and also what a plus equal does. What a plus equal does, instead of doing, the other way to do this is output equals output plus that, right? You can do that. The shortcut is how it just originally was, right? So this is the shortcut to do that. And so basically you're saying, take this variable, add what's here, okay? And then assign it back to this variable, okay? And then you're doing this where you got the token price here, right? 0.75, that's the value of that, right? And it's a let. That's defined as a let up there. We'll just go back up there. Here it's doing the legacy with the var, right? Legacy grading is going to be defined as a var variable. And then you're doing a token count as well. Changes below. Oh, add a token. Add a token, right? And it's adding those. But all these variables are defined. Let's go look at all these variables that are defined here. The bad thing about having all this CSS in here, probably should move this to it. It's easier to find things. So here's all of our variables that we kind of defined down there, right? Arcade name is pixel arcade, token price, service fee. Well, we didn't use that one, but these different ones. Here's your legacy greeting, right? Made that a var, a let, right? So token price, let will let you change that. Are we changing the price of that? Yeah, I think we are on some things, right? But maybe that's something that, you know, first you have to, like I said, you probably always make something a const unless you say, it doesn't need to be a const. I need to change this. This is going to end up changing. Then you make it a let. Try to avoid var altogether, okay? It's always good, and you notice the const here, the constants, all uppercase, right? With the underscore, right? I know that I think C# has a different kind of standards, not standards, but suggest it on some of these things. But now that there's constants, but you know, it's always easier when you're down in your code and you don't know, you got some stuff defined at the top, you're using it, it's easy to tell. Actually, and even here in this editor, like what it's doing here for the, it actually makes that a different color because it's a const. Okay, so there's all your output, and then what you're doing is text content, variable output, right? So you're changing this text content, right? So we're getting the element by ID, so we're getting the variable output, and just for fun here, we're going to learn to do this more in the future. But I know you guys are very capable, and I just want to show you something here. So we're going to grab that element. Now it's already changed. I'm going to hit F12 here. I'm going to go to the console. Now there is going to be some issues. I just want to know if you're using like a live server and stuff like that. It can cause some issues. Live server puts some stuff in the code kind of at the end and stuff. There's some things that can happen, but something to just kind of keep in mind. But here, I just want to go ahead and drop this right in the console, right? I'm going to drop that right in there. What happened there? I don't know why that didn't save that. Let me go grab that again. Okay, it's freaking out on something here. Seems like Chrome's kind of blocking things more than they used to, which is probably good. I don't like you cutting and pasting code directly in there, right? So I'm just going to do this by hand real quick here. Where were we? Okay, so document, oh, should have kept that up there. Put that on another side here. So document, see, don't paste code in here. If I keep doing that, it'll keep on giving me warning after warning. So I'm just going to put it in here by hand. All right. How's that look? Get element by ID, document.get element by ID. That all looks good. Variable output. Okay. So what that does is it gets you this whole thing here. Okay. It's getting you this whole thing. So this is the div element, right? Now what you can do here, I think some things have changed. Well, the browser's always changing. They're always updating new versions. You used to be able to do some things differently. But what I want to do here is at the end of this, I'm going to do dot attributes. And you're not going to be tested on this or anything like this. I'm just kind of showing you how within the browser here, within the document object model, what's all happening here, right? So here's your get element by ID, right? And that's basically this thing right here, right? This thing right here. And it's pretty much empty right now, right? But this, when you get this element by ID, you're getting this HTML element. This thing holds on to all kinds of things that aren't even being used yet, right? But they're all available. So I'm just going to do this like attributes right there. Now, if I come in here, and this kind of has these nodes. So it has an ID, right? And here's all the different things, right? It's got a node name, a local name, right? All this text content, right? Value, right? It has all of this. So there's a lot of information, and all of this is able to be accessed, manipulated, changed, etc., right? And you don't have to worry about all this. I'm just showing you that there's a lot more than just a div tag, right? It's basically everything that is part of a div tag, right? And it's how it's handled under the hood, so to speak, a little bit too, right? So let's do that. And then here, so let's go ahead and show the variables. Now let me see what happens. And I'm not 100% sure on this because things do change. It should show me everything here now. Now that, see up here, you just seen the tag. Here you got this little arrow there. Now it's showing you actually the input that's here, right? So it's showing you once I hit show variable names, it updated that with some values and it's dropping that right into here, right? It's kind of hiding. You don't see the new line characters on each one, but it's there, right? And then let's see if, and then you can use up arrow keys, especially if you're messing with this, like up arrow keys. So I'm going to go to the attributes here. We still got this node map here. Just want to see if some things have changed at all. Okay. All right. This ain't quite showing me exactly what I was hoping to see, but that's okay. But I'm just making a point that there's a lot as a part of that tag. The document object model is holding on to that, right? It's holding on to this node map of everything that's part of this ID, right? And this is basically depending on what you're using, right? We're using a div. So these are all of the different attributes that are available with a div, okay? Now there can be other attributes that are available for other, like for images is going to be different, right? Than it is going to be for a div. All right. So let me get rid of this and go back to where we were. All right. So then the next one here is the change quantity. So basically this is taking a token count, right? And adding an amount. So let's see what goes on with that one. Let's go look at our change quantity and then calculate total, okay? Change quantity and calculate total. So change quantity is just going to take this token account, right, up here at the bottom, and it's going to add one to it. Now this is using right, this is telling you right here, could also write plus equal, right, saves you a little typing there, right. Here you're just doing token count equals token count plus amount, right? And that is the same thing at doing that plus equal sign, right? So like we did the other one, plus equals here. So you could just take this one and change this over to plus equals and it'd be the same thing, right? But this is just changing the quantity, okay? So here, every time I click add token, here, let me first show this. Token count, this is automatically got a token count of 1. I'm going to add 1, all right? So I click that one time, so that added 1 to this token count. Now when I click calculate total, it's going to run this function, calculate token order, okay? Let's check that real quick. Calculate token order, yes. Okay. So now when I click that, by default it already had a 1, right? Now it's showing 2 tokens because by default the first time you show variables it was 1, then I added a token, so now it's 2. Actually, if I show variables again, anything that's changed in any of these variables now should show the latest, right? So I click show variables again, I should see a 2 now, right? Since I've updated that token count, which is used both on, right? Which is used up here as well, right? printing this out. So when I run this again, in this other function, I change the value of that. So now I click this, this should update to it too, right? And there it is. Add a token. I clicked it another time, add another time, calculate total, right? And so now I've got 4 tokens, show variable values, and now it should be 4 as well, right? Just kind of showing you some things here. Here's doing a toFixed. So when you want to kind of do things like a toFixed, we'll learn a lot about this later. But the toFixed here, what this is doing is adding like decimal places. Because sometimes when you start multiplying with different numbers, you start, you're going to have a longer, you're going to have more than two places at the end, based on the fraction, right? It could be much longer than that. So by using toFixed, then it's going to control that to basically kind of round that up, right? Round that up as needed. So, okay, so that one was that one. This is events in action, insert a coin. So what's insert a coin do? Okay, it's going to, thanks for playing, alert, inserting coin. So here it's going to be a window alert, right? So this is one of those window object things. So if we want them back here, let's go back to that. Just for fun, just real quick. Let's do window and hit enter. So here's like the window. This is the bomb, right? This is the bomb. This is the window object of the bomb. It has all of this stuff. Not that you have to worry about all this, but it's pretty extensive, right? This is outside your document object model. This is all within the browser itself, right? This is the window of the browser. It has all of these crazy things, right? Some of them we'll access, some of them we'll use, many of them we won't, okay? One of the very first one is what? Alert right there, right? But they also have confirm boxes where you can confirm, create new windows. You can actually, using JavaScript, you can create a new window as well. We'll learn to do that eventually, okay? Lots of different things. All of the events we kind of used or kind of learned a little bit about, like focus and click and all that, right? All of those are based on windows, on click, on close, on blur. These are all part of the bomb, right? These are part of that. And this is part of that window object of the bomb. Okay. So here we're doing alert. Someone hit insert coin. There's your alert. Thanks for playing, right? Pretty straightforward there. Okay. Hover over the high scoreboard. I don't know what I'm hovering over. Oh, just this. Hovering over that, just changing color based on the hover, right? Let's see what we're doing here. Tracks which cabinet skin is displayed. Let's look at our HTML real quick here on that one. So that was that. This is the mouse over. So this is just doing the mouse over, mouse out, right? We've kind of done some of these things with CSS as far as with JavaScript, right? So here you're just got this and you're embedding this on mouse out, on mouse over. On mouse out could also just call a function that would set this as well, right? Here you're just inlining, putting all this here, right? For this mouse over, right? That's mouse over and that's mouse out, right? Okay. And then the next one here is show the neon cabinet. Let's see what this all does. So swatch the document, get the cabinet swatch, get the cabinet label, right? You can look and see what it does. So it's going to change the color. It's going to add some text, right? either have classic cabinet or neon cabinet, right? If this is an if-else statement, we're going to learn these later, but this is an if-else statement. So if, based on what the value is, okay? Actually, this is just flipping the Boolean. So it already knows what it is, right? It already has a value. Once you click this, it's just going to flip it, right? Basically a toggle. Different ways to do this. There's just one, okay? So basically you're running this code. Each time it's just toggling. Now, right? Now this is running this one. Executing this. If this is going to be, if this is true, it's going to run that. Else, it's going to run that, right? So right now we have that. If I click this again, it's going to come in here. This is going to be false, right? So it's going to execute this. And there you go. Okay. I know this is not a lot here. When we really look at the other chapters, this was just kind of a real brief introduction chapter, so we don't have a lot. The demo will be a lot more interesting in the following chapters. So, but I will go ahead and make this demo available as well, the demo code available as well. Please let me know if you have any questions on anything, and have a great day. Thanks.